Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 452. Hey, if you want to download this workbook and follow along, click on my YouTube channel, then click on my college website link, and you can download the workbook Excel Magic Trick 452. In this trick, we have an epic video about the if function, 15 examples. And we are going to see technical aspects of the ifs, in particular how to change the logical test. And then we'll see lots of specific applications like in accounting, commissions, for a data set when you need to add a column. All sorts of great examples. Here's the list of the 15 examples. You can look through that if you download it or hit pause, right? Let's start off with the first 4 tricks. And in the first 4 examples of the if, we want to see how to deliver the same result to the cell, but with 4 different logical tests. And lots of people do lots of different tests and can get to the same result. Pretty much it depends on your point of view. Now, our goal here is revenue expenses. We have some calculating formula here, subtracting, taking revenues minus expenses. And we need a label. Right now, our label should say net income. I wish. Net loss, because we have a loss. However, if our revenues become greater than our expenses, then the label needs to say net income. If only I could type. I probably still didn't spell. There we go. Net income. Anytime you have that situation when you're putting 1 or 2 things into a cell, or for that matter, a formula, 1 of 2 things, and there's some logical test that comes out true or false, you can use the if function. Let's see how to do this. We'll see one way here. If we have a logical test, and the logical test can come out to be true or false. There's only 2 possible results from a logical test. Then you tell the if function, what do you want to put in the cell if it's true? What do you want to put in the cell if it's false? Well, let's just start out with the easy one. Let's just say, hey, is our calculation over here less than 0? If that cell is less than 0, then what do we want? We need the label net loss. That's the value of true. Otherwise, we want the label net income. Now, when we enter this, we need to test it. We have 3 things to test. We're tested revenue greater than. It looks like it came out right. Now let's test it lower than. Looks like it came out right. Now let's test it, and this is one people forget, exactly on. Sure enough, it comes out exactly as we planned. Now, another way to do this, notice we checked the cell and we said less than 0. But we can come here and say equals if. Say, is that greater than or equal to? Both of those conditions are going to result, or greater than or equal to 0. Both of those conditions will result in what? Net income. That'll be the value if true. Notice it's greater than or equal to. There is no single character for those 2. You have to type them in order. And the greater than or the equal sign always comes second. Right? So greater than or equal to. That'll cover both the greater than and the 0. That'll get the net income, and then in quotes, net loss. And be sure to put text in formulas always in quotes. Also, you have to spell check when you're in edit mode. When you go Control Enter, spell check will not check a word in a formula. Now, but we'll test it in just a moment. But let's look at 2 other ways you could construct this formula. And probably this is even a better way, because it'll be based on our formula inputs and not the formula result. Then we can build an if here in this cell also. So you ready? Equals if. And we're going to say revenues greater than or equal to expenses. Right? Similar to the way we did here, but we based it on our 2 inputs. If that's the case, then what do we want? Our value if true, which means the thing we go into the cell when the logical test comes out to be true, is net income. Otherwise, net loss. Still, another way to do this equals if. Instead of our logical test being revenues greater than or equal to, we're going to say, are the revenues less than the expenses? If that's the case, which means this number is smaller than this, what do we want? We want net loss. That's the value of true. Otherwise, we want our net income. Now notice, revenues less than. We didn't have to use an equal sign here because if they're exactly equal or greater than, then that would plop this value into the cell. Control Enter. 4 different ways to do the same thing. Now, let's test it. All these cells are linked, so when I change this to 1,000, all of our 100, that's everything less than, right? All of our labels should say net loss. When it's exactly 500, they should all say net income. And when it's exactly $1,000, they should all say net income. All of those works. Now, these formulas right here that are checking the actual inputs have an advantage. If we have a net loss, in general, you don't want to show a negative on an income statement. So in that case, we want to think about how to build an if, use the if function in a formula here to change this value. When this says net loss, this needs to be showing a positive because the word net loss implies the negative. So now we're going to come over here. And now we're going to, we have our formula here. So we're going to build an if here. Well, let's just think about this. Right now, what do we want? We want a formula equals revenues minus expenses. But what if this is less than? What's the formula? We got our label working, but what's the formula here? It's the opposite. It's the 500 minus the 400. Now, you could use an if here, and I'm going to show you the if equals if. And we'll check. Are revenues less than expenses? Then what do we want? We want our formula expenses minus revenue. Otherwise, if that's false, you want your revenue minus your expenses. Close parentheses. Now, let's check and see if this works. If I make this 1,000, that should be showing positive if I make it exactly right on. And if I make it less than. Now, you actually technically don't need to do the if function here, even though lots of people do this. Watch this. You can use the ABS. ABS is absolute value, and that is the distance from 0. So minus 100 and 100 both have the same distance from 0, which is 100. So you can pick whichever one you want and just do it that way. So now, if I change this to exactly right on, this one they both calculate correctly. If I make it greater than, they both calculate correctly. So this ABS is probably the best way to go. All right, now let's move on to our next topic. What if you want to have, remember we said one of 2 things in a cell, but what if you have 3 things? Now, some people, not necessarily for income statements, but in other situations, they want to show profit, break even when it's 0, or loss when it is a loss. And so the way you can do that, notice there's 3 things in the cell. That means we need 2 ifs. We'll just start our if equals if. And I'm going to say revenues less than expenses. Right? What do we want in that case? We want to show loss. Unfortunately, the revenues were less than the expenses, so we have to show a loss. So that's the first thing, value if true, comma. And now, all of a sudden, you get to a value of false, and you're like, but there's 2 of them. If there's 2 of them, or 3 or 4, or however many are left, it means you need to do some more ifs. Right now, we only have 2, so now we need to do our second if. The logical test is going to be, and I'm just going to go, I went from a loss, now I'm going to go to break even. So I'll say, is that equal to that? So now we're using the equal sign. Are they exactly equal to? And that either comes out true or false, right? Then what do we want? We want, in quotes, break even. Notice we started with the low end. If we started with this one first, then if we got a loss or a profit, this would have come out. So we started with the low end and then went to the logical next one. And now finally, there's only one left, value of false. It is net income. Close parentheses. But wait a second. the close parentheses is not black. That's how you tell when you have more than one if. You just keep typing close parentheses at the end until you see the black one. In our case, we only have two, so we don't have far to go. But sometimes you have a lot. In our last example, we'll see a bunch. All right, now let's check this out. Right now it's a loss. What about if we put 500? Break even. What about if we put 1,000? Net income. So that formula, those are two ifs because we have three items. All right, next we want to see a formula that will check to see if two columns are in balance. Very common formula. People have our need to check all the time. Now, we can see with our eyes, right? But what you see in Excel is not always what's in the cell. And that's why people build formulas like this. Equals if. And you could just do a straight logical formula. You could actually just do this one. Equals this equals this. And then it says true or false. But sometimes people don't want to see true or false. They want a more explicit message. So you say if this is equal to this, comma, that's your logical test. Then what do you want? I want to put something like debits equal credits or in balance. Otherwise, the value of false, not in balance. Now, what in the world's going on? Not in balance. That is why people have formulas like this. That means there's some problem. And a lot of times, where's the problem from? It's from the paint on the outside of the house or the Halloween mask. Number formatting is just sitting on the surface. It's like your Halloween mask at Halloween or your paint on the outside of the house. We have 0 decimals showing. My immediate response would be to increase the decimals. Okay, those still look all even, right? And I increase it again, and sure enough, there it is. There is a slight fraction of a penny. Now, this data was typed in. Someone made a typing error there. However, sometimes you can get formula results where there's a fraction of a penny way out somewhere. This formula will catch it, and then you can go make your changes. All right, so now that we see what this indicated to us there was a problem, we had to go hunt for our problem. Now we can come over here and change that and see that it's in balance. All right, another example. We're going to do something similar. We're going to check two accounts, not two columns, but two accounts. Here's a schedule of accounts receivable. When you do schedule accounts receivable, you have a total at the bottom. And that total has to be equal to the controlling accounts receivable. And usually it's somewhere else. There it is right there. So we need to build a formula here. And it's going to involve a sheet reference because one of the cells is on a different sheet. Right? So equals if this cell right here is equal to, and now we need to do a sheet reference. Now, a sheet reference is no different than a regular cell reference, except for one thing. Where is the cell? It's on a different sheet, right? So in order to click on that cell, you actually first have to do what? Click on the sheet. Notice what it did to our formula. It put CAR exclamation point. If you have a space, it'll have a single character, a single quote explanation point. That explanation point says sheet reference. All right, and then I click right here. Now it says CAR. So it's saying B11 where the formula is on that sheet. Is that equal to A5 in the CAR sheet? That's totally cool. So I'm going to finish my formula up here. If that's true, then the value, if true, I'm going to put in single quotes, in balance. Otherwise, not in balance. And then I'm going to enter. All right, so it's in balance. Now, if we had, and this is common, you're doing your schedule accounts receivable over here, and you type in 500 or something like that. Not in balance. It means you have to go track down the error. That's what that formula is telling you to do. Right? These are checks and balances. If we're in charge of making sure of schedule accounts receivable and the controlling account are in balance, we should have a formula like this. Why? Because the logic and the math in Excel is less fallible than we humans, right? So as soon as we see that, then we go, OK. Then you hunt for it. You realize, oh, name 2, it was 600, and boom, it's in balance. All right, still another example. Here we want to see how to use the if function to show or not show a formula. And here's the situation. You have a template like this, and your goal is simply to take units times price. I highlighted all the cells, and the active cell, I'm going to build my formula. 3 cells to the left times 4 cells to the left. I'm going to hold Control and tap Enter to populate all the cells. Very common bank reconciliations or checkbook balances or invoice totals or data sets like this have this calculating formula. And that 0 is just plain annoying. So we need to amend our formula. Now, when you have a if function to show and hide, in essence, what we want is we want one of two things. We either want the formula or we want to see a blank in the cell. All right? So if you run into this situation, what is it? We're going to be adding records like this. And when do we want it to turn on? Exactly when 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cells to my left is not blank. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to put my if right in front of it. We have to think of a logical test. I'm going to say, actually not, you could do this 2 ways. Actually, I will do it 2 ways. Is that cell not? And not is less than or greater than. That's the weirdest comparative operator we have. And if you're never seen it before, you just have to get used to it. Not, less than or equal to. If it's not blank, and blank is double quote, just like the text entries we saw before, but nothing in there. If that's true, then what do we want? We want our actual formula. Otherwise, what do we want? The value, if false, double quote. That's a blank. It's going to show the blank. So the 2 things that are going to the cell, formula or blank. Close parentheses, Control Enter, double click, and send it down. The other way to do that, of course, is this. Equals if, and this is actually the way I usually do it, if that equals blank, then what do we want? Blank. Otherwise, this times this. It's funny, I always do it this way. If you look at a lot of Microsoft Excel templates that you download, like for invoices and stuff like that, they usually use the not construction. OK, so there we go. That one is right there. Let's go ahead and test it. We're going to get our next entry here. And then we sold 15, and each one of these were $6, $5, and this was a product 2, right? So now as soon as we add our date here or anything not blank, right? Anything not blank, then that turns on. We delete it, it turns off. All right, in this example, we want to look at dates, in particular, due dates. We want a label right here that says past due or not past due. So we'll use the if to put one of 2 phrases in. And then we'll see an example of one of 2 formulas. Now, here's today. Right now, it should say not past due. As soon as this day gets to something bigger than the 18th, it should say past due. So we'll do equals if. And the trick is we're going to say, is this date right here less than or equal to? Because if it's exactly on the 18th, it's not past due yet. So we'll say less than this date, whatever today is, less than or equal to the due date. Then what do we want? Not past due. Otherwise, we're going to have the words or phrase past due. All right, so let's test it here. And right now, it's not past due. And by the way, I have this set up to show it as a negative, meaning we still have 3 days left. But as soon as we put a 19 here, this becomes a positive, and it says past due. Now, some people like it that way. They want to see a negative mean we still have a few days to go. However, if you did not want that, we could show positive either way. Now, here's another trick. Notice we have this logic already set up here. And we have some phrase if it's not past due, and some other phrase if it's past due. But down here, here we want 2 different formulas. Down here, we want a formula not past due. In order to show positive, we'd have to take the bigger date minus the earlier date. But as soon as it switches to past due, we're going to have to take this bigger date minus whatever this is. So the point here, this logic's already set, word, word. Now we're going to use the same logic down here. I clicked escape. I put it into edit mode and control V. Obviously, I didn't copy it. Zip. Control C, escape. Control V. Now, same logic, except for here we want a formula for not past due. The formula, because we want to show a positive number, will be this one minus this one. However, if that's false, which means it is past due, that means this date will be bigger, so we'll take that bigger date minus that one there. And that formula will put one of two formulas using that same logic. Let's go ahead and try it. Let's change this to 19. This one shows past due and 1. This shows past due and 1 is a positive. But when we go back to 15, you can see not past due and it shows a negative. But here, either way we go, this shows a positive here. And so what tells the user if it's past due or not past due is that formula right there. All right, let's look at our next example. Next example here, this is a data set. And sometimes you get a data set and you're like, we need to quickly go through and all of the products 5 are done out of house. All of the other products are done in-house, whatever it is, whether it's maintenance or storage or whatever. So for all of the 5s down here, we need to show out. For all the other ones, we need to show in. So the best way to do that, you don't want to build some big ugly if that lists them all individually. There's only one that's done out of house. So you say equals if this right here is not less than, greater than. If it's not equal to this pro 5, and I'm going to have to lock this with my F4 key to go down because I need that all the way down. If that's not 5, then it's an in-house. I'm just going to put the word in. Otherwise, it's out. You could actually do this too. You know, you didn't have to. I didn't have to do that. You could have done the equal too. But nevertheless, out. All of the 5 should say out. The other way to do that, obviously, if I copy this over here, equals if this one equals, and now I can't grab that right there, so I'm going to actually use my arrow key to grab that product 5. Hit the F4 key to lock it going down. So anything 2 cells to our left that's equal to our product 5, then what do we want? In quotes out. Otherwise, in. And then double click and send it down, and you have our out. So that's adding an extra column to a data set. Still another one, commission. And these last two, we're going to do commissions. And this one is just a straight commission. We're going to do the if function to deliver a percentage and use that result in a larger formula. Over in our next one, we'll see how you have multiple hurdles. And so it's probably not the best way to do an if. But let's see it here. Anyone who's over $7,000 gets whatever that cell is times 3%, 3% of the sales. So our formula would be equals, hey, look, one cell to my left. If that is greater than or equal to, because we have a kind boss, if you get exactly 7,000, you still get the hurdle, that. And we need to lock that going down. If that's true, what do we want? Now, we could do this a couple ways. We could put our calculation right here, which we're going to do. Or you could just grab the percent, dump it in the cell, and multiply the if times the amount right here. But let's do it this way. If that's true, what do we want? We want one cell to my left times this percentage rate. And I'm going to have to lock this going down. Otherwise, a big fat 0. Close parentheses. Control Enter. And double click and send out. You can see I have the randomizing formula here. The other silly way to do this would be to paste this and do our test, right? There's our test, and then just grab this 3% right here. Otherwise, 0, right? That grabs the percent. And then what do? You put the formula in edit mode and just take the whole if and multiply it. Because the if, remember the if delivers one of two things, but it's delivering one of two things to the cell. But now that we put multiply two cells to our left, the if is delivering one of two things to the formula. Control Enter. And then there you can see that works all the way down. Finally, our big example here. And I'm going to do the big, ugly, long way, because a lot of people do this. And there is a trick for speeding up how you do this, and a convention. But then I'll show you a much faster way. Let me change the size here to. Now, the way this particular commissions calculation will work, let's say we have this $9,083. We'll just jump over here, find the right category. That's be between 9,000 and 10,000. It will be 4% times the whole amount there. There are other ways to do this. You could have commission brackets where you'd actually have to take the 9,000. First 7,000 would be 0. The next 1,000 would be 2. Then, and then the difference of $83 would be times 3%. But that's not what we're going to do here. If you want to see that calculation, the next video, Excel Magic 453, I'll show you how to do that. Quite complicated calculation, but if you know how to build your lookup table and either use VLOOKUP or LOOKUP, totally cool way to do that. That's the next video, though. For here, we're just taking whatever here, whatever that is, times whatever the full amount is. All right, let's see how to do this calculation. All right, let's do the first one. If our sales are, and I'm going to say greater than or equal to. Now, here's where people get into trouble. They maybe start with some middle ones or do it out of order, and then you have to use the AND function for your logical test. But if you start at the top and work your way back down through the table, you don't have to use the AND, right? Because this thing, if you check to see is it greater than or equal to the biggest value, right? If it gets a true, then it gets this and it's done. Otherwise, you just tell it to look at the next one. So you get to skip over an AND by doing it from the top, methodically down through the scale of values and percentages. All right, so what are we going to do? We're going to lock this going down with the F4 key. If that's true, then what do we want? We want this cell, one cell to my left, times this percentage rate. And that percentage rate needs to be locked, going down. Now, comma. And here's where you ask yourself, if there's only one value left, I just put it there. But there's not. There's lots of other possibilities, so you have to build another if. And here's the trick. If you have a big if, you grab this, including the comma, and copy it. Now, notice the two cells are right there. When I paste this, Control V, I need to go to the next category, but they're still looking there. I'm just going to realize that I'm in row 8, and I need to go to row 7, so I'm just going to change this. 7, and you could see it light up immediately, and then I'm going to change this to 7. Immediately, it lights up. Then I Control V. I'm going to change this to 6. You can see it immediately lights up. 6 and immediately lights up. And then Control V. I need to get to my 5, so I immediately change it to a 5. You can see it light up, and a 5. Now, everything below is 0. That's it. We actually come to the end right here, and it's safer to work up here. And type a 0. Now, we have a lot of ifs here. How many do we have? I don't know, but I'm going to close parentheses. And I'm going to keep typing close parentheses until I see the black one. When I see the black one, I know that I'm done. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Now, maybe people like to do ifs. And if you look out there at people's spreadsheets in the working world, a lot of people do it this way. But forget it. As soon as you have this situation, and actually help actually tells you this. If you go look in if, help, it actually tells you that at some point, past 2 or 3, you should just go use the VLOOKUP or the LOOKUP function. But here's the requirement. There have to be mutually exclusive categories. And the first column, remember, this formula, look through this first column here, right? The first column has to be sorted in ascending order. So the biggest one's at the back. As soon as you have that situation, and these categories are mutually exclusive, means everything is covered, you can just switch to VLOOKUP. Now, you're thinking VLOOKUP. If you made it through this, right, then the VLOOKUP is going to seem like awesome. It's going to be like, wow. VLOOKUP equals VLOOKUP. The lookup value, well, what is it that we looked up every single time here? B2, B2. It's whatever values in this, or actually that B2 right there, right? So it's the same with the VLOOKUP. The lookup value is going to be, hey, B2 right there, comma. And here's where the magic comes. It's as if the code behind the scenes for VLOOKUP just knows how to do lots of if functions. Instead of doing it individually, you just highlight the whole table. You need, now this, for VLOOKUP, you don't need these values here. I have those values listed there only because I built this label here for those of us that are learning about the category for each one of these. You don't need that. But we have it here, so I highlighted all of them, right? And you got to hit the F4 key. That table's got to be locked. And then comma, the column index. Well, remember in the if, we always took our value here, the lookup value, and compared it here, right? But then we always had to go 1, 2, over to the third column to get the percentage. And that's what column index means. It means, hey, where is the thing you want to throw into the cell? 3. The third column is the percentage we're retrieving and bringing back here. Now, the last argument you do not need because we are doing an approximate lookup. Our table is assorted in ascending order, so we close parentheses. Now, the VLOOKUP will deliver that percentage. I'm going to double click and send it down. And you could see that it's got the 4 appropriately for this one right here, the 2 appropriately for this category right here. But what do we want? I'm going to hit the F2. It's whatever that VLOOKUP result is times the sales. And that's it. That's a relative cell reference. So I Control Enter to repopulate all the cells. And just like that, I have. If I hit my F9 key to randomize these, you can. Okay, so the VLOOKUP here just really blows away that if. Hey, one last example here of the if function. It's a very important example. It's an advanced example. For some functions like median, when you want to do a multi-conditional calculation, it's hard to do with a median. Now, what does the median do? The median function is a type of an average, and it finds the one when sorted that sits in the middle. It's a measure of central location which gets rid of some of the extreme values. Now, median, if I wanted to get median for location 1, how in the world do I do that? Not only that, but there are some zeros in this data set, and I don't want to include those in my calculation. So in this case, if comes to the rescue. Because for location 1, I want to look through. I want that number, and I want not that number, and I want that number and that number. So I need to select amongst all of these values here. Well, there's 2 conditions. Please give me location 1, and please give me all the values that are not 0. So the if comes to the rescue. You say if. And logical test. Now, the logical test, as we've seen in all other 15 examples, we do one logical test, and it spits out 1 true or 1 false. We're going to do an array formula now, and it will spit out a bunch of trues and falses. And the way you do it is you highlight the whole column. I'm going to click on the top value, Control-Shift down arrow, and then because I need it locked because I'm copying it down, I'm going to hit the F4 key twice. I'm locked it. Logical test, a bunch of a range with a bunch of values. You say, are anything in that range equal to this one, a relative cell reference? If you highlight this and hit the F9 key, which is evaluate, you can see what? It delivers a bunch of trues and falses, but I'm going to Control Z. Because remember, our goal is to get inside the median a bunch of different values, right? Well, those trues and falses will help us pick out just the values from the range we want, right? But get this. If logical test, we type a comma and the value of true. Well, we can't put the whole range yet. We have a second condition, so we put a second if. And the if for this one is we highlight this whole range, Control-Shift down arrow, F4, F4, and we use our not. Less than, greater than, not 0. And technically, we'll leave that here, but technically you don't even need that because this is a series of values. In fact, I don't think we will put that in there. These are a series of values, and the way the if function works is if it is given a number that's not 0, it interprets that as true. So for example, if you give it -1 or 1, those are both true, whereas 0 is false. So really, you just put this whole range in there for your logical test, and it will interpret true, 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 true. And then when it gets to that, it'll say, oh, false. All right, so we have our two ifs. Now, what do we want? Comma, we want this whole range. Control-Shift down, arrow F4. That range right there is what is going to be delivered to the median. But the trues here, when there's a true here and a true here, it'll pick out the value from that range right there. So the if is very important for array formulas in advanced Excel. I'm going to close off all those parentheses. And this is an array formula, and there's a special keyboard shortcut because you have to tell Excel this is an array formula. The if function does not like it if you give it a whole bunch of trues and falses and you don't use this keyboard shortcut. You have to hold Control Shift at the same time. So I'm holding Control and Shift, and then I'm going to tap Enter. If you don't do that, if you just hit Enter, or you just hit Control Enter, it gives you a value error. That value or error means you forgot to use the secret handshake, right? Control Shift and Enter. Now I can double click and send it down. Just like that, we have calculated a median given two conditions. All right, that's a lot about the if function. We'll see you next trick.